Good morning. My name is Lori Fry, and on behalf of the Alliance of Women in Workers' Compensation, I want to welcome you to today's webinar. Today's webinar is entitled Advocacy and Claims, will last approximately 1 hour, and is being broadcast today, October 13th, 2022. Before we get started, I would like to thank our 2022 corporate sponsors for their support on hosting events such as this. They support us not because they want their logos up on a screen, but they support the cause, which is to affect positive change in the workers' compensation industry through networking, supporting, mentoring, and collaboration. The Alliance is inclusive of all professionals in workers' compensation, regardless of career stage, with the belief that we can all learn from and support each other. Please be sure to head to the Alliance website for all upcoming events. We are excited to be hosting webinars, collaboration sessions, and in-person events throughout 2022. Be sure to check back on our website for registration details. If you cannot make one of our live, virtual, or in-person events, don't worry. Events will be recorded and on demand for our followers. Our theme this year is Acknowledge, Adjust, Advance. Each quarter, our webinars and events will be centered on each mini theme. This quarter, we focus our topics around Elevate Together. Be sure to join in these conversations as we facilitate both in-person and virtual events. Have you joined our book club yet? This year, we launched our 2022 book club with 6 books to choose from, all by previous keynote speakers the Alliance had in our events in 2021. If you love reading books, be sure to head to the Alliance website to sign up to join the club. Change is preceded by trust. It is through acceptance and inclusion that trust will be formed and positive impact will occur. The Alliance is committed to creating a safe space in the workers' compensation industry for women of diverse backgrounds and experiences through a shared culture that integrates various perspectives. This is who we are and who we will be. The time to do better and be better is now. The Alliance understands that diversity is a journey that will take time to make meaningful changes for our organization, our followers, and our supporters. We will be intentional in making progress along our key pillars of change. For today's webinar, we are so pleased to have a conversation between industry leaders regarding advocacy and claims. Our speakers have a variety of industry experience and a history of successful claims programs because of their focus on advocacy. In this session, they will discuss what is advocacy and claims, what works and does not work when utilizing it in your program strategy, and why it is so important for all parties of a workers' compensation claim. The helpful tips and proven strategies shared in this session will be sure to set up your programs for success. As this is a live interactive webinar, please feel free to comment and ask questions throughout the webinar using the Zoom chat feature seen on your screen. We will answer your questions as time permits. We love seeing our followers engage throughout our session. Thank you for the time you are spending with us today, and we truly hope you enjoy this webinar. Thank you for joining Advocacy and Claims today. We are so excited to have this panel, not only because we're getting into some meat of workers' compensation, which is why you guys are all in this group in the first place, but also our panelists today are just really exceptional. I'm just so excited to hear from all of them on this topic. One thing I will mention, and great news, the chat is live and working, and I saw that it was working, which is great during that video. So please engage in the chat during this session. Our panelists are all very open to any questions you have and well-versed in this topic. So happy to answer those questions as time permits. So please utilize the chat this morning. So I want to get started by having everyone on the panel introduce who they are, what your background is, and then also your association with the Alliance. So Kathy, would you like to kick that off for us?
Sure, Lori, and good morning, everybody. Super happy to be here with everyone. I'm Kathy Tasik. I am with Sedgwick, and I'm an ambassador for the state of Illinois with the Alliance. I have been with Sedgwick 31 years in July, and have a significant background in workers' comp, both in Illinois and nationally, having been our national practice leader for some time in the past. So really excited to talk about advocacy and really more than just the word, what it means, and some of the things that that we can be doing as an industry to help people. So thanks a lot, Lori, for having me.
Yeah, of course. And I echo what Jason has said in the chat. What a career. Good for you. So Nancy, how about you?
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Nancy Strubler. I'm the Director of Workers' Compensation for National Express. We are a transportation company. I've been with the company about 15 years and seen a lot of changes in the work comp arena in those 15 years. And I have been associated with the Alliance. I've been a member of the Employer Advisory Board since April of 2018. And it's been great to see this whole program grow and change, and they kept us and sustained us through COVID as well through the webinar. So that was great, a great addition to our families, to be able to listen and get, raised up by folks speaking to us through the webinar.
Totally agree. Noreen, how about you?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Noreen Olson. I'm the Senior Manager for Workers' Compensation Claims at Starbucks, and I have been with the company now for 8 years. But my experience in workers' comp is beyond my association with Starbucks. I'm a nurse by background, and so spent the early part of my career at the patient care bedside and experienced both medical oncology, critical care, and infusion prior to going back to school and taking a different journey into working with people who are generally well and want to stay that way, which is what it led me to occupational health and thus workers' compensation. And my background since becoming occupational health nurse has been in both heavy industry. For a while, I worked for PACCAR. They build the long haul trucks, then back to healthcare, taking care of healthcare workers, and then finally into food and beverage, working for Starbucks. And I'm really pleased to be here. Been associated with the Alliance for a number of years as a true fan of the organization and a speaker. Thank you.
Great. And Sharon, how about you?
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Sharon Evans. I'm the Workers' Compensation Manager for Big Lots, and I am a Alabama football fan, and I am part of the Employer Advisory Council for the Alliance. Been part of the council for okay, Aggies, roll tide, and so I have. Been part of the Employer Advisory Council for the Alliance for about 2 years. And so my job at Big Lots is I get an opportunity every day to impact the lives of our injured workers by bringing together a cohesive team of like-minded people that impact their lives and making sure that they get the best care and the best of what they need to get them back to work as quickly as possible.
Great. Yeah. And as everyone can tell, first, I love that everyone is so engaged in the chat, even if it's, football and others. It's wonderful. I love that it's happening. Also, as everyone on the joining us today can tell, the experience of our panelists is so fantastic, which is why I'm so excited to have this conversation with you guys, because your experience is very diverse and just very robust. So just to jump right in, the first question is really, advocacy is kind of a buzzword. And so what is advocacy? What does it mean to you? And so let's go in reverse order. So sorry, Sharon, to make you go immediately again, but how about you?
That's okay. To me, advocacy is the support for a common goal. It's everybody coming together, support of a common goal. And to me, it's a three-pronged approach. It's a partnership. So you have the employee, you have a communication approach, and then you also have an established partnership with the company or your employer that you're working for. So it's everybody coming together, everybody speaking the same thing, saying the same thing, and so it's building that common goal, coming around, center, focus on one goal.
Great. But Noreen, anything to add to the advocacy definition?
Sure. Thanks, Lori. I would say, to me, advocacy is acting in a manner that eases the way for the person you're serving. So boiling that down in its simplest terms, I would say leading with love, following with action.
I love that. Yeah. Nancy, how about you?
Those were great, both great. I don't really have anything. I think of it as being a cheerleader for somebody, advocating for a common goal, cheerleading, making sure they get what they need and supporting them and being a powerhouse behind them to make sure that things go as planned and activities are taken care of. And in our cases, the employee is taken care of.
I love the powerhouse behind them. That's fantastic. And Kathy, how about you? What are your thoughts?
You know what? I love how Noreen put it. I think if you look back probably 7, 8 years ago, our industry started to talk about this word, advocacy. And originally people thought of it as having to be a separate person, a person that advocated for an injured worker. And when we looked at it from an industry perspective, it's really looking at everything we do. If you think of it specifically to workers' comp, looking at everything we do to make sure that we're looking at it from the perspective, as Noreen said, of the person you're serving. And that has to be everything from the way we communicate, the way we make decisions, how we treat them. And I think it was a great awakening for the industry for people to be able to really look at it from the injured workers' point of view, even if it's soft language like we're denying your claim or you're not eligible for this. I think we've all had to kind of take a look as society's evolved and said, like, are we really doing the right thing for these injured workers? So to me, advocacy is looking at all of the things we do and making sure that they're consistent with the approach of care, empathy. I love what Noreen said, but really looking at it from a different lens.
Yeah, that's so true. And so leading into the work comp space in particular, I know I asked for your definitions of advocacy just as a whole, but particularly in work comp, and you all did hit on it a little bit from the employee perspective, but where does this show up in the claims process? How can we be advocates for anyone within the claim process? And so Nancy, I'll have you start this time. Where is advocacy best used within the claim process?
I think it's throughout the claim. So I've been to a couple of sessions and people have been talking about advocacy, and I'm wondering myself, we have our frontline workers, the supervisors talk to the employee first, they take the information. They need to be the first advocate for that employee. And I'm not quite sure those frontline folks are set up to do so. So I'm planning on doing a webinar to help with some training to make sure folks understand what role they play and how they can be an advocate for that injured employee. Because when they come to report a claim, that employee doesn't know, for the most part, what is a claim, how does it work, who's going to be calling them, how do they get their bills paid, how do they get their lost time paid. So our frontline workers, our supervisors, need to be able to help explain the basics of that to them. And then throughout the claim, be able to be a resource to them and a liaison between myself and our TPA and the medical providers, and just be able to provide support throughout the ongoing claim until conclusion.
Yeah, I think that's great. And actually, I hadn't even thought about that too, is where advocacy might be missing. So that's a really great piece too, that, we kind of probably, at least from my perspective, often think about it once the claim is in my hand versus
right.
the front. So I think that's a really great call out. Noreen, I see you nodding along a bit. What for you, where in the claim process do you really see this is an important piece?
Well, advocacy, in my opinion, is critical in the workers' compensation space because we are serving people who are in unfamiliar territory. Imagine for a moment that you're a tourist and you've just landed in a big city where you don't know the language, you don't have a map or any electronics to help you navigate, and your money is the incorrect currency. Talk about frightening and stressful. It's the same for our workers or partners who've been injured on the job. This is total unfamiliar territory for them. And they need us as their employers, the claims examiners, their nurses, to first establish a caring and genuine relationship. This builds trust. And then we need to follow that initial outreach and trust building relationship with action that, once again, eases their way, helps them get into the right care very promptly with the right provider, helps them receive the financial support they need to keep the lights on and the refrigerator full if they're unable to work, but better yet, gives them a pathway to temporary modified duties so they stay whole financially. And then importantly as well, we need to be very candid, truthful, and accurate in the information we share with our injured workers and partners. That's going to solidify a trusting relationship and build a cooperative one as well.
That analogy is fantastic. That's such a great way to look at it, and able to put yourself into the shoes of another person. If we haven't been injured at work, that's a great way to think about it. Kathy, what about you? I know Sedgwick is very much on the forefront of a lot of advocacy and the thought behind it. So what's your perspective?
Thanks. I agree with everything, obviously, that Noreen said. One of the couple of specific ways I think it shows up, Noreen talked about, the language and kind of showing up and not knowing where you're at. We developed very specific educational videos, and this is for people regardless of whether they're injured at work or they're injured outside of work, so that if an injured worker wants to, they can go and in a very plain language learn how the process works. If they want to actually sit and watch a very short video that was made with the perspective of the injured worker and makes all of those acronyms very easy to understand. So that's one thing. I think we've really focused a lot on education, because as Noreen said, many people, this is their first experience having something unfortunate like that happen. And the other way, and this might be somewhat unique, that I look at where it shows up is, if you think about all of the generations we have in the workforce, I think advocacy shows up in the way we can communicate with them. So one of the other things that we're doing is making sure that, our 20 somethings can get information by going online and looking at their claim information. And then people of different generations who are more comfortable talking on the phone easily can access somebody to have that conversation. But kind of re-looking at those old standards of 3-point contact, which has been the same since I started, even prior to Sedgwick, and thinking about what does that really mean for the different generations, so that my 25-year-old, if he were to have a work comp claim, would have the kind of communication that would mean something to him, and looking at that differently. So I think just recognizing the differences in people too. Those are just two, Lori, quick ways I think it shows up in the process.
Yeah, I think that's great. And actually, we have a question in the chat from Claudia. Those videos that you mentioned, are they state specific or are they general?
They can be. Yeah, they can be. We work with employers to do different things. So we have a general one, and then a lot of times employers want to have very specific things for them, and we put it right up there. And when somebody logs in, depending on what employer they work for, they may see that state specific video if it's a very specific program, or they might see one that's more general.
Wow, that's great. And then Sharon, how about you? Where does advocacy show up in the claims process, or where do you think it's important?
Yeah, I think what everyone's been talking about definitely stems around communication. So, and how we communicate, and the ways that we communicate, and terminology that we use, and Kathy was talking about age appropriate, and it goes, all of us going back to realizing that the individual that you're dealing with, realizing that every claim is an individual person, and looking at it as, how to handle that particular situation, taking it face value when it comes in. What are the particular scenarios or things that are going on with that individual? So it all is just stemming straight from communication, what that person may need based on whatever's going on in their life or in their particular situation. And then the other thing too that I thought about was, not only terminology, not only demographic, but sometimes you have a situation where, okay, that workers' compensation claim is really not a workers' compensation claim. And that claim really needs to be handed off to benefits. It needs to go somewhere else. So what is the process to hand it off? To making sure that that person gets what they need and gets to the right and appropriate party, and making that an easy handoff, so that it is not something that's overwhelming. Because let's face it, how many times are you frustrated when you make a phone call to anywhere and you get the automated phone call, press 1 for this, press 2 for that, our people, they would like to be able to, look, I'm injured, I have this situation, I don't understand how this process works. All I know is I work for Big Lots, and now you're telling me that my claim is not work related. Okay, so now what am I to do? Yes, I need food in the refrigerator, my light bill needs to be paid. So what is my next step? So all back to communication and being able to hand it off to the appropriate person, and having that relationship with whomever your internal teams are, and being able to get them to the right and appropriate party.
I love that, because similar to what Noreen said as well, this is, again, if you think about it, like almost the golden rule, like how you want to be treated. So it is everything that we do in the work comp space is really just how we would all want to be treated in any sort of situation. So I think it's such a universal topic that way. But looking specifically at your particular programs, what are some strategies you've implemented? So Kathy, you mentioned the videos. So I think that that's really fantastic and a great opportunity for employers to take advantage of. But for the 3 employers on the panel, what are some of the strategies you have implemented that are specific to either your program or your claims process? And Noreen, I'll start with you.
Okay, thank you. There's a number of strategies that we use that I would like to share. And I think the first one, and probably the most important one from my perspective, is self-reporting of claims. When you allow your employees, or in our case, our partners, to self-report their claims, it really begins that relationship and that message of, you are trusted, that if you've had an injury on the job, you can report it and we will believe that you really did have an injury. Second to that, though, that we do right at the beginning of the claim filing is we provide the initial roadmap. We call it our medical information guide, and it's a 2-pager that we either email to the injured partner or text them a link. And on page 1, it contains their claim number, the address and name of the third-party administrator. It contains their information about pharmacy first fill, durable medical equipment, diagnostics, also 2 clinics that are within if it's an urban center, 5 miles away maximum. If it's a more rural setting, up to 15 miles away. And we target occupational health because we know that's going to be the initial right place for care for our partners. And then we also offer a telemedicine option for partners who don't necessarily need or want to be seen in person. That was an outgrowth of the pandemic and is proving to be a good addition. Then on page 2 of this medical information guide is our Starbucks specific work restrictions form for the physician to fill out, which paves the way for a very early look at the opportunity for temporary modified duty. In addition to those 2 things, we really do, as all of the panelists have emphasized, lean into communication on the very next day. We want voice-to-voice contact whenever possible from the examiner and from a member of my team in risk management. Now, voice-to-voice isn't always possible, especially with our younger set who prefers not to speak on the phone. And so we also really lean into tools of texting and emailing. But making that initial contact the very next day solidifies that we're here to help you. We understand what you're going through is stressful and frightening, and we want to provide you all the information you need to be successful in your recovery journey. Then after that, we also follow up with a second map that is a very short infographic that is that we call, it's our workers' compensation journey. And it basically begins with day one on the injury, follows a meandering path through a fictional forest of what the partner can expect from day one to claim closure. Again, priming that pump with information to help them know what's coming. And then finally, like I said, we begin talking about early return to work on day one. And that allows us to also establish the expectation of recovery. We find this conversation is really important in this era where we are post-pandemic and we are in times of great uncertainty. Having these conversations early on help our partners who are still in a slightly emotionally fragile state.
Yeah, I think that's great. I love the first thing that they get is all the information right up front. It kind of goes back to what Sharon was mentioning too about people don't know what they need or what happens in a work comp claim. So that's really great. Nancy, how about you? What are some specific examples that you have?
What a great program and what a great setup for that. That's awesome. I'm blown away by your program. I'll tell you that. Maybe I'll have to steal some ideas from you. We start out our claims with the nurse triage program. So when our injured employee comes to our location and reports a claim, we ask them to call a nurse triage. And we feel that this helps the employee to get some understanding as to the severity of their injury and how quickly they need treatment and where they can go for treatment. Just to put an ease of their mind that, maybe within the next 24 hours you go, or maybe you go on an emergency basis. So somebody understands their injury and can guide them for the treatment. We also send the employee off with the first fill prescription card. So if they do get a prescription from the pharmacist or from the doctor, they can immediately go to the pharmacy and get that first fill, and it's no out-of-pocket expense to them. So that alleviates that. We also provide the job ability form, asking the doctor to assess the ability of that employee to return to work on restricted duty, because we typically cover any restrictions. If that employee can get to the office and can, sit or stand or whatever, we will find something for them to do. We want that employee to remain engaged in normal activities of life and not have a change in their status. We also partner with various company clinics across the country. We have panel cards in those states that necessitate it. And then we ask the location to also follow up with them after their appointments, ask them how they're doing, get that return to work slip, and make sure they're checking in with them. We also ask the location to check in with them when they are off work to make sure that they're doing okay. When is their next appointment? Do they need anything? How are they doing? Just to make sure that there's that constant contact with them. They're not left standing out there. I was at a conference and an employee, the panel was speaking, and this employee had been with the company for 25 years, had a workers' compensation injury. They never heard from the employer thereafter. And he was so flabbergasted that he had given his 25 years to the company, nobody called to check on him. So I don't want us to be in that position where we aren't checking up on our employees, because that's critical to keep in touch with them. And then we also ask that the locations report the claims within a 24-hour period. So that way the adjuster can reach out. We can get the employee what they need. They can make the contacts. They can assure the employee, that they've got the claim, here's what's going to happen, and that, their benefits will begin in medical and things like that. So those are some of the processes we have in place.
Perfect. I see some questions in the chat, by the way. We will get to those. I want to hit on on Sharon and Kathy before I do, but I do see the questions there. And I agree with Sean, actually, with what you said, Nancy. I think triage is so critical. That's such a game changer to have someone immediately speaking to an injured worker. I think that's great. Sharon.
Right, because they don't know, the location doesn't know. We used to just send everybody to the medical clinic for treatment right away, but sometimes just speaking to someone eases everyone's mind.
Yes, it's so true. I think a former role that I had when we implemented triage, it truly did change how I think everyone just from the beginning treated that claim or thought of that claim. It was really fantastic. Sharon, how about you? Any Big Lot examples?
Yeah, our program is very similar to Nancy's. We start off with our stores with the nurse triage service, where we ask them to report 24 hours. Same setup, same program where they get to speak with the nurse. We feel that definitely adds that special touch to speak with a medical professional on the phone, and then it takes off from there. Where it's then they, if they need to get to a particular vetted facility, because that's one of the things that we felt that we were lacking is the company that we're using, they actually, during the time of COVID, you had, one of the things we found, you had some medical facilities that had stopped treating, stopped taking work comp patients. So we had to, didn't realize this, but the company that we're using, they called all the facilities and actually make sure that they were seeing work comp patients. So, we were able to turn things around and make sure that they were, still treating patients. So, anyway, we get them into the facilities and get them treated. They have first fill cards that they go with. We're making contacts with them. So same type of plan, to where we're reaching out to them, making sure they have everything that we need. We have our nurses that are available. Then we have our team on the ground here in Columbus that's reaching out to them as well as our TPA. So we are all like-minded. Everybody's moving in lockstep to make sure that our injured workers have what they need. And then I would be remiss if I didn't talk about our distribution centers, because we also have in our distribution centers, we have nurses that are on site in Columbus and in Apple Valley, California, where we have nurses on site to also be there to help. But and then on top of that, as I was talking about, how do you hand off? Everybody, knows what to do and knows where to go to be able to get information to our teammates, whatever it is that they need. So everybody's just moving in lockstep to make sure that our injured workers have everything that they can possibly get or possibly need. So we're running a very similar program with what Nancy mentioned.
Yeah, that's great. I think a nurse on site, that's got to be a great peace of mind for the buildings to know that they have a resource there. That's great. Kathy, I have two questions for you. One is this, any specific examples that you have either that Sedgwick works on or that you've seen with some employers, but I also have a question from the chat about those videos. And are you able to share any of the verbiage of those or just any specifics of those videos?
Yeah, if you want to reach out to me separately, I'm happy to share what we can. The videos themselves are proprietary, but happy to share the content, like the kind of the spirit of the content to help out. No problem with that. Yeah.
Perfect.
And then just on the specifics, the programs that, what Nancy, Sharon, and Noreen talked about are really the guts of it. What I think we see globally is the very first thing employers need to think about is their own culture. So what will work in their culture? Because what works for Noreen at Starbucks with her population, which is vastly different from Sharon's population or Nancy's population, you have to really first think what's going to work for us. And that includes, fortunately or unfortunately, the way you're structured. So what do you need to do to, get people to make that phone call like Nancy talked about? Is that in your culture? Is that ingrained in your culture? And if not, what are some of the things you need to do there? And I do think that that's a critical piece as well. And then on the back end of it, something that wasn't mentioned, but I think we're seeing more of is really, how are we measuring that? People always say, how are you measuring that we're taking good care of people? And one of the ways we do that, not all the time, but for specific employers, is through surveys. So we will survey the injured workers mid-claim to say, how's it going? We can catch issues that way, but also kind of measure the experience that they're having from their point of view. So thinking about what those metrics are, if you look at the traditional metrics in workers' comp, they all have to do with numbers. They have to do with, did you call within 24 hours? Did you this? But we're starting to add in more metrics that have to do with the experience of the injured worker, so that this whole advocacy piece comes to life for all kinds of injured workers in these different scenarios that you heard about this morning.
Yeah, that's so true. And I'm seeing a lot of comments about it not being cookie cutter, making sure that it fits with the exact culture. Because, I mean, I'm sure, Noreen, a lot of your partners probably are texting versus picking up the phone, and so just knowing how the different cultures work, it's so important. That's such a great point, Kathy. And Noreen, question for you specifically. There's one in the chat about self-reporting. And I know you mentioned that is what your partners do. Can you talk about what that entails or what it means to self-report?
Well, sure. Thanks for the question. In just very simple terms, when one of our partners is injured in our retail spaces, what they do is alert their supervisor or manager that they've had an injury, and then they are allowed to leave the floor. And if the injury is of a serious nature, for someone has fainted or fallen and can't get up, then we're calling 911 and having emergency medical services arrive and assess the partner and take them off to the hospital. But most of our injuries are not that kind of event, and our partners are able to pick up their smartphone and dial a number to our third-party administrator's central call-in line and begin to file their claim right then and there in a conversation with a trained agent. They can also choose to do this online if they're, phone averse. They can click a link that takes them to a reporting site where they simply register, and then they begin to enter their claim. And then at the end of either of those processes, they're given their claim number and their access to the medical information guide. And then they can leave work. We pay them for the remainder of the shift that day, and they leave work either on their own or with transport from a friend or a family member to seek care at a local clinic. That's simple. Now, in our manufacturing wing, we do it slightly differently, closer to what Sharon and Nancy are doing, in which we have a nursing triage approach. But again, the partner is allowed to speak to that nurse in private without a supervisor standing over their shoulder and, trying to minimize the injury, if you will. And so they speak directly with the nurse, and then based upon Schmidt-Thompson guidelines, the partner is advised about whether care is important to be sought immediately, within the next 3 hours, within the next 24 hours, or sometimes, even in our manufacturing plants, we're going to need to call 911 for a more serious injury.
Great, thank you. And we have another great question in the chat about measuring the success of this. I know, Kathy, you mentioned that on the back end. So for your programs, I mean, everyone has great examples and really focusing heavily on advocacy of your injured workers throughout the claim process. How are you measuring the success of this? Nancy, do you have thoughts on that?
The telephonic triage program does have a separate measurement that Cedric provides, and they assess how many people call in. And if it's a self-care, does it remain as for record only or an incident only? If it's clinical, does it remain clinical or is it emergency? So they do assess that for us. What I see are the upticks in litigation when things aren't going quite right. So sometimes we can ask the employee why they got an attorney, and they'll say, I didn't get this or I didn't get that. Or the employees reach out to the locations and say, I'm not getting my TTD, I'm getting this collection notice, I'm getting a variety of letters, this, that, or the other thing, or they just don't quite understand what's going on with their case. And so the feedback from the employee to the locations and then the locations to myself, not always is it captured in a report or in numbers, but it's that communication piece that Sharon mentioned earlier. So if somebody's unhappy about something, they're going to let you know, and then they elevate that up to myself. And we also can see when there are challenges within our locations, there's an uptick in claims. And so if we're not doing what we need to do within a location and people get angry, and the way that they can get heard is by filing a claim or by making something, more than what it may be, then we know that there is something going on at that facility as well. So a lot of times it's just the mere communication and the employee's feedback.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. Anyone else have specifics on how they measure any of this?
You know, Lori, one thing I would add to that. So I mentioned, you know, the satisfaction of the injured worker with the process. But if all these things come together, you should see an overall positive trend in spend. And that can be measured specifically by your litigation rate. So how many new claims are going into litigation? How many of those new claims are first notice litigation? I think all of us know that, particularly during the pandemic, but even post-pandemic, a lot of the new claims coming in with an attorney, that number has been steadily increasing due to social media, all of the things that we know social inflation kind of has caused. So looking at the first notice litigation, lit rates generally, and overall spend. So if you think about the things people talked about, my employers reaching out, and we're seeing some of those things in the chat, you know, a lot of the litigation comes because the employer didn't really care or didn't show they cared. If all these things add up together, you should also have people getting back to work sooner too, because it's not one thing. So those three things I just want to mention as hard numbers that you can look at to think through that.
Yeah, I think that's great. That's
Yeah, if I can add to that too, I thought about that, and I was also thinking about your TTD days and your light duty days as well. So I think if you monitor, I know all these numbers, but yeah, and sometimes it's not just one. So sometimes you've got to look at, like Nancy was saying, sometimes it could be just be in a particular region. You know, maybe all the other areas are looking good, but you got this uptick in California, you know, so sometimes you just have to, and then you just subtract California and just look at the rest of the other states. But you just have to, you know, you just have to kind of monitor and just see what the uptick is. But in most of the areas, you know, for me, medical spend, TTD days, light duty days are kind of the three things that I would usually home in on. And I agree, you know, litigation as well. But those are kind of the things that are good areas to definitely home in on and watch with your program.
yeah.
And Lori, I would just add to that. We're doing all the same measures that Sharon and Kathy and Nancy have mentioned, including an experiential survey of our injured partners at both 4 months age of the claim and at claim closure. But in addition to that, we're also trying to keep track of how many text messages our examiners are sending out to our injured partners and how frequently we are successful in meeting our expectation of 24 hours to return a call that has come in. And that helps us get a better understanding of, do we have all the players in the workers' comp arena aligned on the important steps of communication and accurate information for partners? Are they doing those things? So we know whether or not we have the opportunity or need to re-educate or infuse a little more enthusiasm around our advocacy-based approach.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. That's great. And I have a quote. So kind of in what you were saying, Kathy, with the overall claim costs, but then also just thinking about some of these triage and different specifics that you're implementing. And I'm going to roll this in with the question that Angela has from the chat as well. At the end of the day, a lot of these examples, or some of these examples, do have a cost associated with them. So how do you get your company or your decision makers, your leadership, to buy into the advocacy model in order to get the budget for it? And Angela's question, then the headcount potentially too, you know, there's got to be some extra focus on your employees, which means more time from an employee, from a department standpoint. So what are some strategies or some ways that you can sell this up the leadership chain to get the buy-in? So Sharon, I'll start with you on that one.
Wow, that's a good question. The first thing that I would do is I would start off taking a snapshot. You got to start at base one. So because in order to get the leaders buy-in, one of the things that upper management, they like to look at is money. Money is what they're more focused on. It's great to be able to go in and say, well, if I had this head count, and this head count would allow me to make this touch base, to be able to call and do all these feel good things. But upper management, they want to see how much money you're going to save. So take a snapshot of where your program is on what day one, and is what I would do. Day one could be the fiscal year, whatever your fiscal year is of your company, is what I would do. So this would probably take a year to do. Take a measurement of where things are, okay? And I would take a look at your program of those key factors, like what we talked about. Take a look at your lit rate, your TTD days. Take a look at your lost time days, okay? I would start there. And then what I would also do, you take a look at those numbers. You maybe want to go a little bit further and take a look at your mod rate and roll this into how insurance premiums, how that could, because that could also affect things too. I'd take a complete snapshot, okay? Then what I would do is maybe take a small subset wherever your highest frequency or your highest area is, maybe just do a test of a small area. And it's going to take some work. Maybe if you can focus on Florida, do a test in Florida, see if you can impact that particular area where you can just do one thing. Maybe it is, okay, so for Florida, what we're going to do is we're going to start reaching out to these associates, or I don't know, something that you can do, and see if you can impact the dollars in that particular area. And then you can have something tangible to show to management to say, okay, well, see, in this state, I was able to do this. And if I can do it in this state, and I can impact the dollars here, just think of what else I can do in these other areas. So maybe start with what you have and test it out, and then show the results, and then see what you can do in other areas, is what I would suggest. You can also reach out to whoever your partners are, your current partners, whoever your TPA, whoever your broker is, and get suggestions and ideas from them as well. Take a look at your program and bring them into the fold as partners, to take them in, to talk to upper management as well, because I'm sure they have other benchmarking and studies and things that they can pull like companies together, possibly to bring that information and present it to upper management as well, to help make the case.
Yeah, I think that's great. I echo what Donna said. Love it. That's a great answer, Sharon. Kathy, what about you? Are there any thoughts that you have that you've either seen work well, or just how to sell this?
Yeah, Sharon covered a lot of really great things that I think are broad enough that people can really think about them. But I also would point to looking at the end, Sharon mentioned money, and of course, for all companies, workers' compensation is a significant spend. So looking at your actuarial projections and taking the experimental things she talked about, or talking to other employers about the impact that some of these programs have had on them. If you can sell internally an impact to your actuarial results, that's usually the best. That's a motivator for people, because those are really important numbers. So I think making sure that there's a connect the dots there. And it is important because traditionally, risk usually, not always, reports either into finance or into legal, or in some cases HR, but not usually. And so the people who you're reporting into may have a different view on what's important, or the view of workers' comp in general. So education on what the benefits of advocacy is really important, because a lot of people look at workers' comp as they don't look at it as a benefit per se. They look at it as just a cost. And again, it goes to culture. So lots of different things. I think Sharon covered a lot of them, but looking at it from, quantification is the most important thing.
I think the actuarial, I think that's great. Money talks, right? So that's the best way. You gotta spend money to make money, maybe, and sell it that way. There is a question in the chat. I'm just going to present it, and anyone who has an answer to this, please feel free. But are your employer-based advocacy teams reaching out to every injured worker from severe to minor, or do you have a specific threshold or triggers that would advocate or that would warrant an advocate or some reach out? And that's it for anyone who would like to answer that.
Well, for Starbucks, that's every injured partner.
Okay. And triage, I assume, Nancy, for you is anyone with severe,
Yes.
minor, anything.
Mhm.
Yeah. So in that case, every injured employee. Okay.
Yes, unless they need to be transported by ambulance, we ask that everybody call.
Okay. Great. So advocacy for everyone is
Yes.
seems to be the sentiment. That's great. Another thing too to think about from an advocacy perspective in this current age, with the pandemic and everything, but also the Great Recession, that we're hearing about that everywhere. Employers are losing employees, going either switching companies for whatever reason, or maybe just leaving the workforce altogether. What does advocacy and claims, or how does advocacy in a claims process factor into that? What are some ways in which the advocacy can actually make your employer not necessarily be as impacted by the Great Recession? And Noreen, I'll start with you.
Well, first I'll say that the current atmosphere really requires that we double down on advocacy approaches. And, there's so much misinformation and uncertainty, financial stresses circulating in our general population that most of our injured partners at Starbucks are going to come into the claim with a healthy dose of skepticism. And that's why we need to double down and, as I said before, lead with love, follow with action. And that includes strategies like, not delaying a temporary total disability check because you may question the validity of the claim, but rather getting that partner into medical care, financial stability, and sorting out the uncertain pieces on the back end. So you remain in a good relationship with your injured worker. You're helping them along the pathway to recovery. And if at 4 weeks down the line, you determine that, yes, indeed, this particular workers' comp claim really isn't eligible for services under workers' comp, it's more appropriately handled in group medical, short-term disability, or other benefits, then the advocacy approach shifts, I think, as Sharon said earlier, into helping that injured partner make a seamless transition into a different bucket of benefits. Because you're right, workers' comp is not really a benefit, it's a statutory obligation and a cost of doing business. But that doesn't mean that as the employer, we're not still responsible for that injured partner's health and well-being. It's just we need to be as careful and prompt and efficient as we can be in helping that partner find the right bucket of benefits. So ultimately, at the end of the day, we have a healthy partner that's back at work full duty, and we sustained a relationship that will allow us to retain that skilled partner into the future.
Yeah, and I think Sharon and Nancy, you kind of already hit on this when you talked about specific areas of your program that might be, it might be a region, it might be a certain building, and paying attention to culture that way. Is there anything else, Nancy, I'll ask you, anything else that you can think of that is a way that you can use advocacy to make sure that the culture, your employee, it's a good fit for them to want to stay with you?
Yeah, we have we've struggled as a transportation company. We've struggled getting bus drivers across the country, and it's been a challenge. And our locations are set up and our employees are set up that they work part-time in the morning, they work part-time in the afternoon. And a lot of them stay at the facilities and they sit in a break room and they have conversations and they visit. So if we don't get it right, if we don't advocate for that injured employee, they're going to tell their story to the other employees. And that's not going to be a good reflection of our culture to those employees, because we really do want to take care of them. And so making sure that we get it right and taking situations like Noreen said and figuring them out on the back end. So we have had situations where we don't find the case compensable. They've had one doctor visit. We've sent them to our clinic because they're making a claim. We will say, we will pay this claim. We will pay this one medical visit, but going further, your case does not meet the criteria for workers' compensation. That way they're not responsible for that one unpaid bill. And we don't get litigation because we've got that one unpaid bill. I mean, I certainly hate to litigate claims when we have 2 days of TTD we didn't pay, or a $500 medical bill we didn't pay, things like that. So we try to take care of the employee, make sure that bill is taken care of, let them know that any further treatment is not going to be covered. And that way, when they tell their story, they can tell a positive story versus a negative story to their other coworkers. And then if the coworker feels comfortable that this is a good company, that we want to work for this company, they take care of their employees, they're an advocate for their employees, that they will stay and not go to the competition or not retire from, busing.
Sure. I love that terminology of you do not meet the criteria for further
Mhm.
for workers' compensation. That feels
Yes.
so different than your claim is
You're
denied.
denied. Yeah.
That is even just those tiny tweaks make such a huge difference. And that really at the end of the day, that's what advocacy is. It is just the tweaks to communication to treat everyone exactly how you would want to be treated. So we have time for one more question. I'm going to direct it to Kathy. It's going to be a little open-ended, but just any other tips or ideas or things that we maybe haven't hit on, or just kind of what are your last thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, I think the two things. The big thing is that this is a way of life. People want, when they have a claim, they want to be able to experience that like they do other things in their life. So your banking, paying your mortgage, all those credit cards, all those things. So the expectation has really changed with the general population of how communication works. So I think that's one thing. And the second thing really is, as an industry, it's so different than what it was 10 years ago. I recall products being sold on, you'll save so much money if you deny more claims. I mean, that wouldn't fly in today's market at all. So really, the language that we use, thinking about this, and then how do we integrate the entire approach? So we mentioned a couple of times people who aren't eligible for workers' comp and a smooth landing, the what's next, which is one of the other reasons people litigate. So I think the next step of this is really, how do you take what the industry's built, make it the norm, not the exception, and so infuse it into everything that claims adjusters do. And in addition to that, start taking that next step of how do you make sure that consistently we do the what's next when something doesn't meet the criteria.
Perfect. I think that's a great way to end this session. I cannot thank you enough for being on this panel, for sharing your wisdom and your insight with everyone. I have great takeaways. It's always good to hear what other programs are doing and just the wonderful outcomes. Hopefully everyone else who joined today also is walking away with great tips. Again, this is being recorded, so we will post it to our website within the next few days. So tell your friends, have everyone come share the wisdom from our great panelists. And thank you again for your time today. I truly appreciate it.